David Muir has long been a symbol of trust and authority in the world of TV news. He dresses well, has a strong presence, and people trust his voice. However, recent events have put a shadow over that well-formed picture. False rumors that he was fired spread like wildfire, and there was a chaotic moment on air while wildfire coverage was going on. All of these things put Muir in the middle of an unexpected media storm. People who disagree with him say that he puts appearances over truth. People who know about it say it's typical Muir behavior. Now even other reporters are starting to doubt the man who was once thought to be invincible. What was once thought of as background noise is now making waves at ABC, and maybe making Muir doubt himself. What really took place behind the scenes? And is this the fall of one of network news's most famous figures? The kid who made the news might not get the answers you expect. It wasn't like David Muir woke up one day and became one of the most watched TV stars. His trip began a long time ago, back when he was just a kid in upstate New York with a dream and a trench coat. Before the cameras and the lights, people who knew David back then weren't shocked when he became the host of World News Tonight. He was the kind of kid who did more than just say what he wanted to be. David dressed up as a news reporter every Halloween, while other kids dressed as monsters or superheroes. The whole outfit, trench coat, notepad and all. He wasn't doing it just for fun either. He really meant it. He always told his friends that he was going to be famous soon. David took the news very seriously, even though he was only a kid. He would drop everything and rush inside when the news came on, while other kids rode bikes or played ball in the afternoon. He had no choice but to miss it. For him it was more than just a show, it was getting ready. He was already starting to look for that life. He was already talking to professionals in the 6th grade to figure out how to get in. Ron Curtis is a news reporter in Syracuse, and he wrote him a letter. He wrote back, and that letter made him very angry. Next, David went to WTVH, the station where Curtis worked, and asked if he could help in any way. It didn't matter what the job was. He carried tripods, tore up scripts, wrote down interviews, and even got sodas for the hosts when they needed them. He was there the whole time and loved it. He felt like he had a second home in the office. He was there so much over the summer and during school breaks that the staff started writing down his height on the wall. They would talk about how quickly he seemed to be changing into the man he would become, and how his voice was getting deeper. That was mostly because of his parents. Sometimes they didn't want to drive him to and from the station, but they did it anyway. Dave was in that office all summer on breaks, and whenever he had time. Even when they were tired, his folks never let him miss a chance. He did talks on camera when he was still in high school, even with his braces and 90s haircut. He did not care how he seemed or spoke. He had it. He didn't slow down when he got to college. He took the chance to study in Spain while he was at Ithaca College. It was a dream for a kid who wanted to be a reporter and see the world. He learned a new language at school and lived with a Spanish family. He took in everything. At every dinner they talked about politics, society, and everyday life. He didn't know it at the time, but he was connecting with people, asking them questions and sharing them stories. One day he'd be doing that on air. He remembered that time in Spain. He could see the world in a new way after that. His mind was more clear than ever when he came back. When he got back to Syracuse, he got his first job at the same station where he had volunteered before. He used to carry stuff, but now he had his own job as a reporter and then as an anchor. It was time for him to move on after 5 years home. Boston got in touch. A big market where people are more careful and expect more. Muir was worked on. In the end, he said that his time in Boston was like a real crash school in news broadcasting. The people there wanted more than just the news. They wanted to know a lot about everything, from sports and politics to snowstorms and problems at City Hall. Every story was important, and Muir made sure he was ready for the task. He worked hard and kept going until ABC News hired him in 2003. He started by hosting World News Now, the network's overnight show that people who get up early and people who stay up late could both watch. Even though he worked odd hours, Muir was slowly getting better and better until he was soon sent all over the world to cover big news stories. Soon after starting at ABC, he was asked to host World News Tonight on the weekends. During the week, Diane Sawyer ran that show. Muir had looked up to Sawyer for years. Being in charge of the weekend slot meant more than just sitting in a chair. Taking on a heritage was what it meant. He was aware of it and respected it. More and more people were talking about Muir as time went on. In 2009, even TMZ had heard of him and called him the Brad Pitt of news reporters. It was an odd term, but it showed how well known he was becoming. He got one of the best breaks of his career in 2012, when he was in charge of covering the presidential race. He was more than just a face on TV. He was really tough questions. Muir kept asking Mitt Romney about his tax returns when he was in the news. People stopped and paid attention because of that. But it wasn't easy at all. His rise to fame wasn't just a lucky accident. He gave up a lot. Weekends became more like work, and free time almost vanished. He worked almost every day of the week, not because anyone asked him to, but because he was so excited about the news. The goal wasn't to get noticed. He really enjoyed the chase, telling stories and having to be responsible. And this wasn't a job I did in the studio only. Most people tried to stay away from Muir as he walked through the field. In 2013, he was in Tehran to see for himself how the U.S. sanctions against Iran were affecting regular people. Reporting like that didn't happen at a desk. You had to be ready to take chances and have feet on the ground. The numbers showed that it made a difference that he kept hosting the weekend shows. People watched because he brought news stories from far away to life. He was the first American news anchor to cover the famine in Mogadishu. He reported from Cairo during the Tahrir Square movement, from Japan after the terrible tsunami, and from Somalia. That job became dangerous. While keeping records on the aid attempts, he and his crew were shot at. They kept going anyway. The stories he brought back were sad. In Somalia, he saw refugee camps that were so full that newcomers had nowhere to go. Later, he talked about how heartbreaking it was to see unimaginable pain happen while everyone else went on with their lives. America's center is on the rise. David Muir finally reached the goal he'd had since he was a child in 2014. He was the host of World News Tonight. It was a big event that most people can only imagine. It was a strange feeling when he took over the place that Diane Sawyer had been sitting in before him. In the same year, Sawyer lost her husband, the famous director Mike Nichols. At the same time, Muir was already well known thanks to 2020. He was now taking on the most important job of his career. There wasn't a long debate at ABC about whether or not to make Muir the face of their evening news. The person in charge there, James Goldston, said that Muir had been getting ready for this moment for years. It made sense to them, and it paid off. The numbers started going up quickly before he had even been in office for a year. It got ahead of the other news shows and became the most watched evening news show in the United States. But Muir knew he shouldn't remain too calm. It's always been a battle between ABC, NBC, and CBS. He said that the stress was real, and that it made him feel bad. Still, everyone at ABC was sure he would last. As the 2016 election got closer, his talk started to get a lot of attention. One conversation he had with Hillary Clinton, in which he asked her why she was using a secret email server while she was Secretary of State, stood out. The conversation was a turning point. It was her first public act of responsibility. She admitted she made a mistake and took blame. The video went viral and became one of the most talked about and important moments in the campaign. The story's other side then came out. After Donald Trump won, Muir got the first job interview after the election. It turned out to be very dangerous. Trump talked about bringing back waterboarding, broke his word that Mexico would pay for the wall, and insisted that the crowd at his inauguration was the biggest ever, even though there was no proof. In that conversation, you didn't just hear the news, you saw how powerful it was as it happened. And when COVID-19 came out, Muir had to change gears just like everyone else in the media. Things changed in the office overnight. A lot of anchors started broadcasting from home, and Muir was ready with everything set up in his West Village apartment. But most days he still decided to go to the studio, even when it was almost empty. He had to make that choice every day. As long as he was healthy and able, he wanted to be there to tell them the news himself. As soon as the pandemic started, an incredibly large number of Americans started watching the evening news again. Reports say that World News Tonight and NBC Nightly News both had about 12 million watchers, which is almost the same number. The most people had watched in 20 years. This many people watched World News Tonight last time, in 2000. Muir felt the weight of the moment because more people were looking at him than ever. It was clear to him that people were scared. There was a public health crisis, the economy was unstable, and there were real questions about who was running the country. Even though he wasn't a doctor or a leader, he thought his job was important. He thought it was his job every night to help people make sense of the chaos and feel a little less alone in it. The quiet war between Stephanopoulos and Muir. There's always drama in the press, but the tension between David Muir and George Stephanopoulos feels more like a slow-burning TV show than a normal rivalry at work. Beginning in the late 1990s, George had worked for ABC News and had been the top anchor since 2014. But over time, David Muir, who was younger, ready for the camera, and quickly rising, started to move into that area. George didn't like it either. The stress goes back many years. When Diane Sawyer quit World News Tonight, the most important show in the evening for anyone who works in TV news, George secretly hoped it would be his turn. He was already in charge of Good Morning America. His dream job, though, was to be on the evening news. What was wrong was that networks were finding mornings to be much more useful. GMA made a lot of money, and George was a big part of that. So ABC gave it to Muir instead of moving him to the evening time spot. But to make George happy, they gave him a prize: special reports and political news. It made sense because of his long history, especially his time in the Clinton White House. That's when the job title chief anchor came into being, made pretty much just for him. It looked like everyone had their own lane from the outside, but people inside ABC News knew better. David and George weren't really having lunch together. There was conflict, and the stress grew as David's fame did. David's World News Tonight began to get more views than NBC's Lester Holt. At the same time, George kept shining during election nights and other important political events. David did, however, slowly start to get more high-profile press, especially when big news happened. Who you ask about that change will tell you a different story. Some say David hated waiting on the bench all day for his 6:30 time slot and worked hard to get more coverage. Some say ABC talked to him and asked him to do more. In either case, a long-term deal was carefully made, and Muir stopped being just the evening anchor. He became ABC News's face. To be fair, the people in charge at ABC tried to keep things fair. They told David to wait, and told George that he would still be in charge of big event coverage, until the 2020 election at least. George agreed with it. He even agreed to give up the title of chief reporter, but he didn't think anyone else would take it. Things got tricky at that point, because David was doing everything a chief anchor was supposed to do, even though he had never been publicly named chief anchor. George thought he was lied to. He thought that man had promised that. In charge of ABC News was still James Goldston, but not for much longer. A big blow to Goldston's authority came when the network fired his lifelong assistant Barbara Fada after an investigation into racist comments she made. After that, things at ABC began to fall apart. George wasn't going to take it lying down. Not stopping at Goldston or anyone in the middle, he went all the way to Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney. George and Iger had been friends for a long time. It was clear this wasn't just about titles or media when he sat down with him. It had to do with respect. Some people even said George might quit and go work for a different network. Disney put out the red carpet for him to stay with the company. Iger met George in person and offered him his own production company, which he and his wife Ali Wentworth could run together. They made shows for National Geographic and Hulu. In the meantime, Muir would keep working on special stories. George would stay with breaking news and Good Morning America. They would both have to stop calling themselves chief anchors, which was a way of making peace. In writing, it looked like a middle ground, but the competition hadn't gone away behind the scenes. Rumors kept going around. One magazine even said George was mad that David's locker room was so much bigger than his own, and that he had started asking his team to find out what David was getting, to make sure he wasn't missing out.
There were people at ABC who laughed and said it wasn't true. Some people weren't sure. Most people didn't feel sorry for either of them. It is said that Muir makes at least $5 million a year. George brings in 3 times as much. Still, they were arguing about the names of their jobs, slots, and dressing rooms. At the same time, many people who work in that newsroom are barely making ends meet on $30,000 wages. In other words, it looked like a truce had been made. In a place like ABC News, where every camera angle is important and names are everything, that kind of peace never lasts. People are saying bad things about David Muir. David Muir was in the middle of a political storm in September 2024. His last job was to help oversee a debate between Donald Trump and Clay Harris. During the show, ABC asked him to check the candidates' facts live. Some watchers loved how accountable it was. Some people, especially Trump fans, thought it went too far. Muir was blamed for trying to tip the scales. Trump criticized the moderators and said that ABC was not telling the truth and that the whole discussion was rigged. He even said they should have their license taken away. Before all of this, CNN held the first discussion in June 2024 without checking the facts live, which made things worse. Muir, for his part, didn't care about the anger. Afterward, when asked about it, he said it was just noise from people looking for something to be angry about. He said they were doing their job by asking the tough questions that people wanted to know the answers to. Things didn't end there, though. Not long after the ABC debate, a false story went viral on the internet, saying that Muir and co-host Lindsay Davis were fired. The story began on a website meant to be funny, but when it spread on social media, people started to believe it. It spread quickly. So quickly that ABC had to say in public that they weren't fired after all. After that, some of the worst flames Los Angeles had seen in years happened in 2025. Muir and the ABC crew went to the scene right away to start reporting live. He showed up in the middle of the destruction wearing a yellow jacket that could withstand fire and had the ABC News logo on it. But it wasn't the fires that people were interested in. It was his jacket's back. People saw that Muir's coat looked like it was being pulled together with clothespins when he turned around on camera. The internet jumped in. Some watchers were angry and told him he was silly for worrying about how he looked during a tragedy. While the city burned, someone said he looked like a fashion model, which started the joke. It got so bad that someone added Muir's face to a picture of Derek Zoolander, and others laughed that he was trying to smoke through the picture. As a joke, even Jack Osbourne joined in and praised his choice of clothes during a disaster. Megyn Kelly's attack on Muir on her show was the strongest, though. She thought it looked silly, like going to dress up during a disaster, and that it was rude to people who were hurting. Things were not any quieter behind the scenes. Word got out that the whole thing made people at ABC look bad. Someone who knows Muir well said it was typical of him, pointing out that he is known for being very concerned with how he looks on camera. They said he's a good reporter, but he's also the type of guy who posts flexing selfies and tight shirt pics on Instagram all the time. They made fun of the idea that Anderson Cooper and Chris Cuomo might also like a tight fit, but they wouldn't do a clothespin trick in a disaster area. In the end, ABC pushed back. They said Muir wasn't worried about how he looked. He was thinking about the fires and the people who were hurt by them. Some people who watched also stood by him. Some people thought the pins were probably there to keep the jacket from flying in the wind, which would have messed up the sound. Someone else said that the clips might have been holding the mic line in place, which makes sense given how crazy the ground was. There were also fans who liked him no matter what, clothespins or not. On their show, Amy Robach and TJ Holmes talked about what happened. Robach admitted that she had had to make similar changes to her clothing in the studio but never out in the field. Holmes said that Muir might not have known about the jacket fix because designers often make last-minute changes without the anchor's knowledge. This was confirmed by a person who told WWD that the fix happened about 30 seconds before the show started. As the wind grew stronger, a director quickly decided to tie the jacket up. Muir wasn't asking for anything special because he was busy with his notes and getting ready to go live. ABC stood by him. They told everyone that Muir was in the middle of an emergency area, surrounded by people who had lost everything in smoke. His attention was on the firemen and the victims, not on fashion, they said. The picture stuck with them, and it wasn't the first time Muir had shown up in a story. Some sources were already suspicious of his Instagram posts while he was on the job. Some said it looked like he was taking pictures more than writing stories. Someone even said he was like a mix of Zoolander and Anchorman because he cared more about lights than news stories. There were times when that idea seemed to be supported. Muir shared a picture from Israel in October 2023 when he was on a very important reporting mission. He wore a helmet, a safety vest and a black shirt that fit him well. The picture quickly drew more attention to his body than to how serious the situation was. His posts about the gym made the impact stronger. Conservative commentator Andrea Tantaros once said that other gym-goers called him Zoolander because he spent more time flexing in front of the mirror than moving weights. She even made fun of the fact that he liked jazzercises. Even though it was probably meant as a jab, the statement added to what was already being said.